Today, we're joined by Donnie Keele of Ultracamp, who will share with us the results of the summer camp employment study, the results of which will give us important insight into hiring, training, and retaining staff.
This is Camp Code, another innovative podcast brought to you by GoCamp Pro. Camp Code is dedicated to helping you create and facilitate the most effective leadership training so we can raise the bar for professionalism and preparedness of our staff. You can find our show notes and our blog for summer camp leaders and directors at gocamp.pro.
Remember what sparked your passion for camp? Ultracamp knows it's about the people, not the paperwork. That's why they built a platform to simplify your camp management. Learn more at ultracamp.com/campcode. Camp leaders, win back your time to what matters most, your campers. Bolin's comprehensive accounting, back office solutions, and tech-enabled team free up your staff to focus on your mission. Visit bolinhq.com, that's BOWLINEHQ.com, to learn more and book a free 2-hour financial diagnostic. Welcome to Camp Code, a podcast brought to you by GoCamp Pro. For us in the world of summer camp, there is nothing more important than well-researched, well-planned, well-thought-out, and well-prepared leadership training. It's at the crux of all we do. It's how we deliver a safe, exciting, kind, supportive, growth-filled experience for our campers and their families. It's how we have our staff return year after year. It's how we make the biggest impact on the world around us. So join us today as we delve into the world of staff training, the good, the hard, and everything in between. We're all in this together. Welcome to a very special episode with a very special guest. Today, we are graced with a visit from Donnie Keele of Ultracamp Management Software, and we're going to be discussing the findings of their summer camp employment study and talking about what they may mean for us going forward. But before we dive in, we're just going to take a moment, as we always do, to introduce ourselves. So Gabz, could you go first, please?
Yes, hi, and I'm so excited to chat with Donnie today. So my name is Gabrielle. I'm one of the camp directors of Camp Oro. My pronouns are she, her, and elle if you're speaking to me in French. And speaking of French, at Camp Oro, we run a linguistic program, English and French, and we try to create a positive environment for gender minorities.
Thanks, Gab. And Donnie, if you'd like to tell us a bit about yourself, please.
For sure. My name is Donnie Keele. I work here at Ultracamp. I use pronouns he, him. My role here at Ultracamp is digital media learning engagements. So I'm really involved in both what can we learn more about how camp works, what works well, best practices, and also how can we teach? What are the things that we can offer back into the camp space? Internally, that looks like helping new people learn how to use the tools that we built. But externally, it looks like this. Going to spaces and trying to contribute back to the healthier the space is, the better it is for everyone. So great to be with you guys.
Great. We are super excited to have you here. And I'm Beth Allison, a former camp director, executive director, and now a camp consultant. I'm co-owner of Camp Hacker and GoCamp Pro, and my pronouns are she, her. And of course, as always, I have a true passion for intentional leadership training. So welcome again, Donnie. We are so thrilled to have you here, and we're excited to chat about this study and what we can learn from it. So I'm going to pass it over to Gabz to get us started.
Thanks, Beth. Okay, Donnie, tell us, what is this? What is this study? I've heard Beth has been obsessed about it for the past 2 weeks. And yeah, so what is this? How did you come about it? How did you pull it off? Because it seems like quite the endeavor.
It definitely didn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
It took some doing. I'd say the inception, though, really came about in my first year here with Ultracamp. Before coming to Ultracamp, I worked in higher ed, in student development, student affairs on a campus near here. So I was pretty familiar. I did that for 12, almost 13 years, working with college students and their experience. Pretty familiar with the college experience. Before that, I worked at camp. And so I was also familiar with the camp experience. And when I first got here, one of the first things that they had me do was start going to different conferences and engagements. And I got to meet a lot of directors. That was the summer of 2022, and I didn't know much about Ultracamp then, and so I relied on what I did know about camp and just asking directors, how are you doing? We were towards the end of the kind of main disruption of the pandemic, and as it turns out, camp directors were not doing well. They were doing horribly. I kept hearing the same thing over and over again. Yeah. Bad, like really bad. And that's also was really interesting. It just stuck out to me that it's it's kind of unusual in our culture for people to be that open about how they are doing in a negative sense. And so person after person was just like, yeah, it's not going well. It's really hard. I'm not doing well. I would ask, what's behind that for you? And I started to hear all these stories from their previous season that had a common theme of just we did not have the people that we needed. Really a core fear for a lot of them was the question, will campers come back? We've had this really disruptive thing around communicable disease. Will campers come back? Will mom and dad risk sending their kid back to camp? And that was the fear. And as it turns out, the answer was, yeah, mom and dad will definitely send them back, kind of in record numbers. But what none of these directors that I was talking to had asked is, will my staff come back? Like, staff had always been pretty positive, had been pretty reliable, and just the assumption was when we reopen or when we can reoperate, yeah, sure, they'll be there. And that's what turned out to be incorrect. So these stories I started hearing were like, oh man, if you worked at our camp at all, you were a counselor. Well, what does that mean? It means that our cafeteria director was a counselor for a week. It means that our maintenance personnel was a counselor for a week. It means me, the director, was a counselor for a week. And what that means is that I wasn't really directing very well that a week. I was too busy counseling.
Yeah.
And it really kind of lingered this question of like, what happened? Where did they go? I just left a university campus. I'm pretty familiar with college students and how they think about this school year. But I'm less familiar with how they think about the summer. And that was the kind of the inception. I still was close by a university campus, and I still had a lot of connections back there. And it really just kind of like, I wonder what's going on here. Like I know students back there. I should go talk to them. I should, before this connection point kind of fades away and matriculates out, I should really go back and talk to them. And that was kind of the start of it, an internal conversation where I raised my hand and I said, can I go do this? Can I go follow up on this question to learn more about this thing that seems to be a pretty big theme? And that's kind of what started it.
And it's so, I mean, it's a big theme, not just in Canada and the United States. It's international. This sort of difficulties within camp. The demand is more in camp. The demand on our staff is so much higher. What's the scope of the study that you did? What numbers are we looking at?
It's a great question. So we ended up designing a study. It was a two-part study, and it tried to face in both directions. Kind of had two core questions. And the first was, what are students looking for in their summertime? So we want to talk to students. The second was, what are camps looking for in students and their seasonal staff? And I say students because a lot of camps hire a seasonal staff out of the collegiate populace. Not all, but many camps do. They rely on that for their seasonal staff. And the initial thought was like, what part of the conversation, can we create a Venn diagram here? What part of the conversation is going well? What part of the conversation is not going well? So we talked to about, on the student side, 615 students on 4 campuses in 3 states, 2 here in Michigan, and then a university in Washington State and a university in California. So we try to kind of spread out a little bit. That does leave some gaps, but we did have a pretty good kind of mix of areas of the country and at least 2 contrasting kind of experiences from Midwest and West, we could say. And if and when we expand, we'll also look to go maybe east, south, and add a few more schools to that. But initially, it was 615 students from those areas and 157 directors from our database. I just reached out. That was kind of the lowest hanging fruit. I reached out to people who were connected with us and asked them to participate. 157 of them opted in.
Oh, it's amazing. It's great numbers.
Excellent. Okay, so before we dive into what the findings were and what all that means, we're just going to take a quick break to hear from our sponsor. A special offer from Ultracamp for Camp Code listeners. Get ready for next season's staff recruiting with the Camp Experience Wheel, a powerful tool to prevent burnout, boost retention, and make sure your staff feels supported. Download it for free at ultracampmanagement.com/campcode. Managing your camp shouldn't be a trade-off between quality and cost. With Ultracamp, you get powerful, user-friendly tools that are designed to fit your camp's budget. No compromises necessary. Ultracamp offers clear and flexible options with simple pricing you can trust. Low minimum entry, clear pricing with no hidden fees, flexible payment terms, and no long-term contracts. Get back to what you love. Ultracamp helps you spend less time on admin tasks and more time creating unforgettable camp experiences. Ready to see if Ultracamp is the perfect fit? Schedule your free, personalized demo at ultracampmanagement.com/campcode. Camp leaders, do you often find yourself bogged down with bookkeeping, accounting, and other back office tasks, taking precious time away from what matters most, your campers? Imagine a solution that frees up your staff to focus on creating impactful and memorable experiences for your campers. That's where Bolin comes in. Bolin offers comprehensive accounting back office solutions designed specifically for camps. Our tech-enabled team handles everything from payroll and bookkeeping to financial reporting, compliance, expense management, spend control, and more, allowing your staff to passionately pursue your number one purpose. With Bolin, you can streamline your camp's financial operations, reduce stress, and ensure your team is free to make a lasting impact in campers' lives. It's time to win back your time and work with a financial partner that truly understands camps. Whether you're a for-profit, not-for-profit, overnight, or day camp, Bolin has a solution for you. Visit bolinhq.com, that's BOWLINEHQ.com, to learn more and book a free 2-hour financial diagnostic. The report is yours whether you sign up or not. Let Bolin take care of your accounting needs so you can focus on what truly matters, your campers. Okay, and we are back, and now we get to get into the details.
Yes.
So Donnie, what are some of the most interesting findings from the study? What sort of jumped out at you and you're like, whoa, fascinating?
Early on, right away, I would say off the top, what jumped off the page was who participated and to what degree. If you looked at the results, yeah, it was 69% female and 29% male, 2% chose not to disclose. Definitely much stronger on the female participation on the student side. And there's something here to be explored. I don't know that I can say why that is, but I would say that's worth being explored. There's other research in education to show that males are opting out of development opportunities. Camps often pitch themselves as a development opportunity, either for staff or for youth. But just the male interest in participating in the questions about what do you do with your summer, how do you approach summertime opportunity was very skewed. Another thing that kind of stuck out was that was also true for directors, almost by the exact same numbers: 68% female, 29% male, 3% chose not to disclose. Almost the exact same numbers. So there also is some parity there in the camp world, and that is also worth exploring. I don't know that I can say what that means, but I can say it did stand out. And on those stats, another thing that really stood out was how many directors on the director side were new. 35% were in their first 3 years in our study, and another 17% were in their 4 to 6. So over half the directors were somewhere in their first to starting their 6th year, and that really stuck out. There's another story to be told there about turnover inside the industry. Apart from that, what are the headlines? I think apart from that, maybe the big headline, another early headline was, it's not internships. A lot of camps I was talking to, and I would say, what do you think the problem is? And they'd say, oh, it's the internships. It's these professors that they're saying you need to chase down an internship. Your career won't be the same without one. And coming from university campus, that narrative is there, but is it actually internships? Our data says no. It's only about 8 to 9% of students that actually reported doing an internship.
Instead of going to camp?
No, just period. Not instead of going to camp.
Okay.
That was an open question. Maybe I should clarify that this study primarily asked students in a general sense about attitudes pertaining to summertime opportunity. When do you look for it? Where are you looking for it? What are you valuing? What's repelling you? What's attracting you? And then towards the end, we do measure some attitudes about camp. But it was the general populace as it pertains to the general kind of season. And then we could kind of place, how is camp ranking opportunity-wise in all of the opportunities they have? Well, as it compares to internships aren't necessarily really competing. Certainly, like the high performers. So when we ask students, how do you rank your own kind of drive for the summer, or your own methods, your own approach to summertime opportunity, there were 4 options. There's one option, aggressive, that I'm applying early and often. I'm thinking about summer and my next opportunity. About 10% of students self-identified as aggressive when it comes to summertime opportunity. And so 9% of students that participate in internship kind of tracks, because internships are something that you have to compete for often, at least good ones.
Yes.
And it also combined with the fact that most students, the majority of students, confirm their summer plans in our study in March and April. That's far too late for a competitive internship. So I think that we could say here, maybe it's possible that a lot of students think about internships, are positive towards internships, they see the value in them, but when it comes time to actually pursuing one, they discover it's too late, or they discover, oh, it doesn't pay anything, or they discover many things about it. And they're most likely actually to finish out the school year, go home, get part-time work, travel, and travel and leisure. Those are the things they're most likely to do, is relax and also work part-time, make a little bit of money. So that stood out off the top. Maybe another thing that kind of went a little bit deeper with students was these different competing priorities for their summer, that students wanted things that don't hold hands well. I need rest out of my summer, a lot of students said, but I also need to be productive. Like I need to grow personally, but I'm so tired. And it's kind of this kind of loop that was like, oh, there's a lot of tension there. Added to that mix is financial pressures. College costs a lot if I plan on coming back. So I want to rest, but I also must work. I need to grow, but I also have family expectations, maybe, that my family wants me to be here, attend this thing. And then maybe added to that last kind of jumble or basket of tumultuous needs and wants on the student side are kind of these core fears. I understand that how I spend my summer has an impact on my future, but I'm not really sure how. Like, I'm not sure what the future implications are, but I'm aware of them, and they kind of freak me out a little bit. I have some anxiety over just like, what if I make the wrong decision? And a real core fear is, what if I fall behind? And that does kind of directly correlate to the camp question of, is this going to bring me closer to my overall goal? Some of them not even sure what the overall goal is. So will this bring me closer to understanding what I should be doing with my life? All of these things kind of combine to create quite a bit of complexity around how I spend my summertime. I think that could be creating an environment where students in the school year say, man, that's a lot. So I'm going to wait. I'm going to push it off as long as I can, because in the here and now I have tests, and my life is complex now. I have tests and papers to write and a job to go to and social energy that I'm putting out. And I have all these things that I feel about summer, but it's just a lot. It's a lot to manage at once. I'll pause there. There's more I can say, but what do you think? Yeah.
That's really interesting.
I love it. Not because it's just information, and information is so important. And I think the conflicting needs is one. I need to be planning, but what am I planning for? I'm unsure, and what I need to accomplish the task, I also don't know. But I have a generalized anxiety and stress and fear around my future, and if I'm doing the right thing. And I've had this conversation with my staff personally multiple times, and I often say to them, as you get older, this is sort of the path of an adult. A lot of the time you have much more freedom. As a child, you go to school and you're limited to the sports teams or the activities that's attached to the school. Like this is sort of your flexibility. But as you get older, you can say to do school or not to do school, to start a career, to travel the world, like all of these. And working at camp is a sacrifice. There's benefits, but there's also sacrifice. With all of this data and information, by the way, we know that some of our listeners are not numbers people. Some of us on this podcast, we're not naming names, are also not numbers people. But there is the translation of the numbers. And so for you, Donnie, getting all of this information, like I'm drooling right now thinking of all of the information that you got. What is what can we do with this information? because now we have it. And I've worked with statistic people, and they're very excited once they get the information, they put graphs on it, but it sometimes stops there. Where do you see us using this information moving forward?
That's always the great. What's the difference between between information and insight? How do we turn information into an insight? Yes, I would say maybe some of the main insights that stuck out to me are what I call the positive experience gap. That when we talk to directors about what do you value in offering, like what's the most important to you in what you're offering to staff, and then staff, what are you most looking for? What's your highest value? Both said the same thing. They both said we value chiefly a positive experience. Camp directors, more than anything else, I want my staff to have a positive experience. And students said more than anything else, I want to have a positive experience. So it seems like a match made in heaven. Going deeper into some of the open answers, however, here was an insight that I had that directors, when they define a positive experience, they're often pointing to benefits. They're prioritizing what is a benefit to this experience that would make it positive. And students are prioritizing cost in what they are defining as a positive experience. So students primarily are looking for a reduction of cost. That is, how stressful will this be? How much energy will this cost me? How much time will this cost me? How much freedom will this cost me? What is the cost associated? And I'm looking at a positive experience by saying it is reduced. A positive experience is one that has less stress, that has less energy output. That's what I think a positive experience is. And on the director side, I think a positive experience is when you grow. I think a positive experience is when you gain competencies. I think a positive experience is when you give back. I think a positive experience is when you have fun. And in a lot of ways, I feel like there was room here where we're talking past each other. We're both saying, I offer you a positive experience, and I want a positive experience, but the tension is, what are our chief definitions of a positive experience? So that's one insight that stuck out to me. And on those same lines, another one would kind of be challenge sensitivity. Students are really challenge sensitive. And what I mean by that is, particularly with camp, when we ask students we ask them, what's your confidence level? Or how confident do you feel that you have a deep understanding of the cost of camp versus the benefit of camp, or the challenges of camps versus the benefits of camp? Much more of them, a much higher number of them prioritized, they said, I am aware of the challenges of camp. It was about, I think, a 14-point gap between the two. They were just more likely to say, oh yeah, when I think of camp, I think of challenges first. And then towards the end, we asked, have you ever been a staff? And several of them had. And so I went back to the data and said, let me control for that. If you have been a staff, do you still think that? And the answer was yes. The overall percentages or awareness went up, but the gap remained pretty much the same. I think it closed by a couple points, but it was still like a 10 or 11 point gap. That even if I've worked from camp for camp, I still associate it. I still think of it challenge first. I think of the parts of it that are hard first. And that kind of speaks to that cost priority, that like, what will this cost me? As a chief question that students walk around and apply kind of to any experience in the summertime, that I'm sure that you all have a benefit. I'm sure that you all offer me something. But what I'm sensitive to is, how much will this cost me? How much will this stress me out? What will the challenges here be? And maybe lastly, I'd say something that was feeding that was something that I called toxic campulinity. And I called it that because I thought it was funny, mainly. It was like, oh,
well done.
a chance to be funny. But at the same time, it was that students are really strongly influenced by the reports of their peers. And their peers are really sensitive to the difference between what was promised and what was experienced. And this is not necessarily a nuanced report that students are getting. That if there was a difference between the expressed values of a place and the experience of being there, students would share that, but it's not like it's a super deep, thoughtful, nuanced conversation. It really sounds like, was it good or not? And no, it was terrible, it was hard, and so I think this can end up having a if there's several organizations that kind of are going to the same populace or area to recruit from, it kind of only takes one of them to have a really rough summer, to have a high turnover year, to like have some mismatches in values or experience a lot of burnout for that narrative to kind of permeate the entire populace. And so that's a real challenge for directors. How do I offset that? Even if I had a great summer, and we already know from other things that just we have, especially in North America, a negativity bias that a single negative review will carry more weight than 5 positive reviews.
Yeah.
And so that is also happening here when it comes to camp. Those were maybe some of the insights that stuck out to me.
And really fascinating when we think about hiring, because that's what a lot of directors are in the middle of trying to do at the moment, in terms of how they get their message across, like knowing those two pieces of information and that the way that they rate experiences are different. We're going as directors from the point of view is this is what we can give you. And to think about telling them this is what it'll cost you, I think is really valuable piece of information that we can make those expectations clear, but frame it in that kind of language that really helps. Because I do think staff is far more stressed than they were 10 years ago in school. And coming into, 5 years ago, really, the pandemic has changed so much for people.
And I think we're doing ourselves, camp directors, we're doing ourselves a disservice when we put so many eggs in one basket when it comes to personal growth. I do see the personal growth in our staff, but it seems this is not a generational thing at all. It just seems that you feel those benefits 5-6 years after you've had that camp experience as a young adult or moving into your first big career. You sort of see all of these experiences and it's like, wow, thank goodness I had those experiences. Now I'm confident in the job that I'm doing, the role that I'm doing, the promotion I'm going for, how I deal with conflict within an intimate relationship. All these things we know camp teaches to people. So I think we know the benefit of it, but I think I'm calling myself out, or I'm calling myself in this situation. I really do know that there's a growth benefit, but at this age, our young staff members or young adults, they're in the now. And so even if the journey is difficult, we know there's a lot of beautiful growth possibilities, but they're not experiencing it in the now. And if you're also paired with anxiety and stress, what are we providing our staff members, or how are we, for me, what this is telling me is also connect to the importance and power of friendships and of that novelty experience of going swimming with a bunch of people behind the island, as long as it's safe, y'all follow our norms. But I think that sometimes I'm guilty of also just really looking at the growth possibility and this is helping me shift a little bit my mindset into, okay, but that's not what's they're going to get that, and that's great, but that's not what am I prioritizing for my staff members so they experience the positive wow now. Oh, positive wow now. Use it. I think it's good. But if you had any suggestions for camp directors, as I'm listening to you, for me, that's my suggestion to me, saying, okay, also focus on some other stuff that they're really interested in. Do you have other insights, either how camp directors can prepare for staff members that are arriving, or even for themselves, as you did, of course, interview a whole bunch of camp directors? What are some of your little, if you could like just help the camps out a little bit, what would be some of your humble opinions on what we could do moving forward with this information?
Off the top, I think maybe at a large scale, I'll start like at a large scale and kind of move down to like maybe the interaction that happens when you're recruiting. At a large scale, if you are seeing your camp primarily or only through the lens of what it's doing for campers, I think you might do well to expand the scope of your missional view to include the staff experience in your actual mission identity. So what that would sound like is we serve campers might expand to we serve youth and young adults, or we serve youth in 2 stages of life, because there's this question that's happening with a lot of young adults in this collegiate experience of like, that is still really similar. Who am I? Where am I going? What am I supposed to be doing? And camps can speak to that. And there's a large part of the camp conversation that's moving away from like, will you be the labor that will help me serve these campers? As opposed to, is camp here for you that can equip you with some of the answers that you need and as part of the process of serving campers? I think for a long time, camp was something that could pay a large portion of your college bill. It can't anymore.
No, not even close.
Even back when it was primarily focused on the campers, it was already kind of doing a lot for staff, maybe that was flying under the radar. And now that the compensation question, the pay question is getting bigger and harder, that also showed up in our study, by the way, then to broaden that scope of seeing is like they are also a populace that we serve, and we serve them in a particular way. Down to like maybe a pro tip is when it comes to having that conversation, being more inquiry based. I think that a lot of directors, administrators are really their comfort zone isn't giving answers. And like kind of the reason that I would ask a college student a question is so that I could give them, I already have an answer in mind for them. But it makes sense. I mean, camp is such a logistical place. You do play this role of like, I give answers all day long. If there was a skill set for the director to build, I would say crafting questions, being inquiry-based. If you want to know what a student's looking for in their summertime, ask them. Ask, what are the costs? What are the costs what is the thing that you need from your summer, and what are you doing about it? I think ultimately, instead of just being more upfront, a lot of directors will come to the table and say, hey, listen, I'm not going to lie to you. It's really hard, but it's really worth it. What a student would hear is, I'm not going to lie to you, it's really hard, blah, 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 blah. They don't hear anything that comes after that.
Right.
The question is, I think a more compelling question for the collegiate is, what are you looking for in your summertime? What do you need? What do you need right now? What do you need moving forward? What are you prioritizing? And then having a conversation of how camp can meet that need. Camp is a place that will naturally meet a lot of needs. Does a student need rest? It's not that camp doesn't have any rest. And maybe if you guys have already talked about burnout, I'm sure you've already talked about systems and having system-based responses. Camp is difficult, but it also does offer a fair amount of different kinds of rest, of active rest. And if that's what they're saying, I'm just tired, it's like, hey, listen, come out and serve, but then also come out and get some really well-needed rest, come out, be in nature, get rejuvenated, whatever it is. I would say asking good questions off the top is what engages a student to want to get the sense of, is this about me doing something for you and then you dipping? Or is this me participating in something that brings me more confidence and more clarity about myself? Will I become more confident in my path? Will I become more clear in my path? And will you help me, or are you just here to like extract labor from me? Is kind of leading with questions. Good faith questions can help reduce that. Maybe the last thing I'd say is reducing the barrier of entry. I see a lot of staff applications that are really long and ask a lot of open, pretty vulnerable questions. Tell us about your experience. Where are your failure points? If it's a nonprofit or religious camp, then I want to know about your experience with spirituality and faith. And it's kind of weird if you're at a booth and you're convincing somebody that camp is worth their time. I just convinced you to take an application from me. And then my application says, prove yourself worthy to come work here.
Right.
And I think that the students maybe feel that tension. And so maybe a test question for me would be, are you reading all those paragraphs you asked for? If you are not, and you can reduce the barrier of entry by having a more simplified staff application process that I would say leads on interest initially. You do need to vet. You do need to know these deeper things, but you don't need to do it all at once.
Perfect. I want to get back to a question we talked about before we hit record on our podcast today. So, Donnie, what are some of the interesting insights you found about directors? We were talking about the fact that so many of them were under 5 years in the business. So what are some of those findings, and what do you think that means? Like, what do you parse out from that information?
Certainly, that was a big story that I think we could follow up on is a high amount of turnover in camp. And I think maybe what's sliding under the radar in there is this assumption that people really are loyal, deeply loyal to organizations at large. That I love Camp Canoe and I will do anything for Camp Canoe. And why aren't they coming back to Camp Canoe after the pandemic? I think if we dig deeper, the reality is that we are really connected to the people who are leading Camp Canoe. When I'm thinking of Camp Canoe, I'm thinking of the director, the admin staff, program, how organized it was, how well it equipped me, everything I learned, the friends that I made. It's if those people were to leave, then Camp Canoe changes for me. Like I don't know anybody there anymore. It's still a great place. Maybe it's nostalgia, but I think of the people that I cared about. So director turnover really represents each time a director turns over, it cuts a lot of the ties with the staff who were less connected with the camp as an organization, but the leader of the organization was the organization to them. And so when they move on and when they wash out or change camps or just leave the industry, it makes sense that a lot of people, that changes the calculus. Do I want to go back? Do I want to have to learn how to work with someone new, or should I just let it breathe and move? Maybe it's my chance to move on as well. That's a part of the story of turnover is students looking at a camp with a new director, and that director can build that. Like if you're a new director and it feels like, I can't convince any of these old staff to come back, you still can build that. But I'd say to the organization at large, don't let your director go if you can help it, because it really has an impact on things below that, on how many staff are willing to come back.
And with your numbers, it shows so many were just newer to the industry. And so I think that speaks also to not-for-profit organizations or big camp organizations like the Y and so on. If you are on one of those boards and you're listening to our podcast, or if you're the executive director of those boards, taking care of your people is got to be a priority for you, because they will move on and you may lose all of the staff with them. And you're kind of starting from scratch over and over again. And that's a really hard way to have continuity in your business. So we've talked many times about working with boards and all of that. But if you are on the other side, if you're the board member or the organizational part of that organization that hires and all of that, is to take care of those directors to avoid the burnout and to avoid them moving on because they're unhappy. If there are other reasons to move on, great. But we don't want to lose them because we didn't take care of them.
For sure. The cost, there's a lot of hidden costs in there that you can quantify if you take the time. And this is one of them, that it will cost you more to recruit. It's cheaper to retain than it is to recruit. And yeah, if cost is the issue, it should just calculate the cost before you let them walk out the door.
There's another sticker for you, Gab.
Yeah, calculate the cost.
Cheaper to retain than to recruit.
But it is a sticker, and because it's true. And I think that we're noticing within our own organization that some of our staff members, in theory, understand what is needed of them. In practice, they love our mission, but there's a knowledge gap and an experience gap that is hindering their progress. And we've assigned one of our a couple of our leadership team members to meet with some of those staff members at a 15-minute period of the day, near the end of the day, to go over some of the instructions that we've given them and some of the goals that we've given them to just level up their experience and give them sort of direct feedback. And it's not everybody that can do this, but what I can say is that I did it out of necessity, and now I'm pleading my case with my financial team on having somebody on our permanent staff to do this. Just exactly the reason that you're talking about, Donnie, is finances. The amount of energy and time, just even the staff training that we put into somebody, if they're if they're on board with the mission and they just need that extra learning or they just need that extra guidance. And I will say that of the staff members that we did this, it wasn't that many of them. I'm hoping we're going to be able to have a little bit more time to guide them throughout the summer. It's just sort of continued education piece, is that it's a 50% success rate, meaning 50% of them, we ended up having to let go earlier or didn't ask them to come back. And the other 50% didn't just improve, but they skyrocketed and they're in leadership roles. And we even flipped some of those staff members' relationships with other staff members who were frustrated with them because they weren't, quote unquote, pulling their weight or they just weren't helpful. They flipped it completely around. And so they're success stories and they're going to fight tooth and nail, or that's my experience, because we did take care of them and we guided them. And so they believe in what we're doing. So it's a rough road, but I do believe in, if you can, trying to take care of the people that already believe in the mission. But some of them don't. Like I said, it's a 50-50. I'm not talking about an 80% success rate here. We're talking about, but then the ones that did go home, we had some very clear paper trail of us trying to support them and it just didn't work out, which happens also. Just sad, but it's okay. Donnie, this was so fantastic, and I feel like we could do like 2 or 3 other
me too.
episodes of it. Let's get this out. When are the graphics coming? What's the social media campaign happening? I'm very excited about all of it. But for now, I think it is that time. Is it, Beth?
Yes, it's your time to recap.
Recap. Okay. So today's recap. Star Donnie had a lot of great things to say, but I like to divide it into 2 categories: fear and positive benefits. Both directors and staff members, there's fear behind camp right now. One, can I retain my staff? Can I keep my staff? Can I hire my staff? And then staff members for themselves, am I falling behind? And there's, of course, competing needs, which we know because we deal with our staff members all the time. They want to be part of it, but they also need some rest time, et cetera, et cetera. Apparently, they're also experiencing that in their life. Big surprise, not at all, but they need a place to manage it. How do we do that? Well, we get curious, and you can just ask simple questions such as, like, what do you need? What do you want? And does this mission connect with you? Which is extremely important for motivation, because I'm going to get into the positive piece. In the positive benefits, both parties are really interested in having a positive experience. However, we do need to lessen that gap between camp directors' expectations and the staff members' expectations of what that positive experience needs. And you could probably do that within the questions. Camp directors, don't be too hard on yourself. We know that you've had a go at it. Obviously, the statistics show that very, very clearly. And when it comes, at the end of the day, we need you to take care of yourself so that you can extend that energy to your staff members and extend that empathy outward. If you don't have it, then it's so difficult to do. So we know you're doing your best. And if you can just take one little thing or shift one little mindset from this podcast, that's all we're asking for.
Thanks, Gab. And here's how you folks can get involved. You can tell us your thoughts on this episode using the hashtag CampCode. You can let us know any topics you would like us to discuss, any brilliant guests that you recommend we have on the show, like the one we had today, great leadership training tips that you have to share. We would love to hear from you because we're all about sharing in this industry. And if you found our podcast to be useful, we'd love it if you could leave us a rating and a review in your podcasting app. So here's how you can contact each one of us individually. So Gab, if they wanted to get a hold of you, where would they find you?
They can reach out to info@waro.com, OUAREAU.com, or they can check out where I work at waro.com.
Thank you. And Donnie, before you give us any contact info you'd like to share, are they able to get any of this information that in the study, or how does that work?
Absolutely. If you're looking to download a copy of the initial report of the Ultracamp summer camp employment study, it's a mouthful, you can go to ultracampmanagement.com/employment study. I'll say it one more time, ultracampmanagement.com/employment study. And you can download the full report there and see a lot more than we talked about today. It's a full report. And then if you want to contact me directly, that's you could email me at Donnie, that's DONNIE, @ultracamp.com.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful that you folks are making that study available to folks, because I've gone through it and there's a lot of great information in there that we did not even get close to touching on today. You can find out what I do at gocamp.pro or email me directly at beth@gocamp.pro. And for our next podcast, Gab and I are going to be discussing how to teach and role model accountability to your staff and when that starts.
But I don't want to.
Our final segment on each podcast is a best practice for leadership training. And again, we would love to hear some of your memorable moments or your most effective tips. And this week, our best practice is going to come from Donnie. So we'll give you the last word here.
Retaining is recruiting. That if you're new and it's hard out there and it's like, how do I retain? I would say conduct an experience audit. See what the experience is like. If you don't have a measurement tool to measure your staff experience, ultimately retaining is recruiting. And students are looking for people and places that give them confidence and clarity about their experience and trajectory. If your experience that you're offering can give them more confidence and clarity, you can retain. And if you can retain, you'll find it much easier to recruit. So that's my best practice. Focus on retention because retaining is recruiting.
Wonderful. Thank you. Camp Code is part of the Go Camp Pro podcast network, and you can check out all our other podcasts at gocamp.pro/podcasts. Thank you again for joining us on this journey as we work to give our campers, their staff, their families, and camps the best experience possible. And of course, thank you so much, Donnie, for joining us, for sharing your findings, your wisdom, for all you do for the industry, and of course, for all Ultracamp does for Go Camp Pro podcasts. We are so very grateful. It was a pleasure to have you on today. We've learned so much. And thanks for the listening, friends.
Please remember, no other industry shares their best practices the way summer camps do. If you use an idea you heard on a Go Camp Pro podcast, please be professional and remember to give credit where credit is due. The Camp Code is brought to you by Go Camp Pro. Thanks for listening, friends.